introduced us to his first wife. So I made plans for a honeymoon. So they always say the wedding's for the wife, the honeymoon's for the groom. So we made plans. Now, we were college students, and this was in between semesters. And so obviously we didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a lot of time. It's Christmas time, so it's a little bit coldish. I'll just preface it with that. So we had the ceremony, left the reception. We're going up to Rio Doso for our first night as husband and wife. It's about 70 mile-ish from where the services were. We get halfway down the road and Denise says, "I forgot my purse." You can't do a honeymoon without a purse, apparently. Turn around, go back to the Las Cruces, get the purse. Turn around, go back up to Rio Doso. So it's getting late, right? Did I tell you this was December and it was cold? We'd rented a cabin with a fireplace. No propane. Apparently, I don't know how to work fireplaces. I couldn't get the flume open. So pretty soon we were smoking out the cabin, right? Not extremely romantic. We're opening windows, opening doors. It's 25 degrees outside. We snuggled that night. Next day, we drive over to Carlsbad Caverns to go through the caverns and meet Denise's brother or sister and brother-in-law. I rented a room at a Holiday Inn. To me, that's high class, okay? Well, they're remodeling this Holiday Inn. And they put us in a room with no pictures, no headboard, just a bed. Well, we're in love. We don't need the TV, so here we go. Well, there's two cats in the tree outside the room having their honeymoon. And I don't know if you've ever heard two cats go at it. But we didn't get much sleep that night. 2 days later, we go up to Albuquerque where Denise's folks live. Well, you can't stay with your folks on your honeymoon. I've rented another room. We end up in a hotel that doesn't have heat. Again. Finally, we end up at Mom and Dad's up in northern New Mexico. And we've had enough of staying in hotels and stuff like that. We're staying with Mom and Dad. And Denise gets up early one morning after everybody's gone, and she wants to do something nice for my father. So she wants to make him his favorite type of a dessert called a date bar, a little date bar cake. So she's reading the directions, says preheat the oven. So she goes over, turns on the oven, starts making it up. 10 minutes later, she's got the ingredients all together, goes to slide it in there, and the oven's not hot. So she comes and wakes me up and says, "Honey, something's wrong with your folks' oven. It's not preheating." And I said, "Well, did you light it?" Some of you know where I'm going with this. Old gas ovens didn't have pilot lights. When you started it, you had to put a match down there to light it. Well, she hadn't told me that she had been preheating it for 10 minutes. So when I lit it, we took care of every dust bunny in that house, as well as the hair on my legs. It was a wonderful honeymoon. Paul made plans for a trip. In the book of Romans, we read that he was really wanting to go see the Roman church and encourage them and be with them. So the chance finally came, but it wasn't quite how Paul had planned it. I'm sure he was thinking of another missionary trip, like when he went up through Asia Minor and stuff like that and established all those churches and stuff. That was what was on his mind. But instead of a missionary trip, he ended up going on a legal trip. He's come back to Jerusalem from these trips to Asia Minor, and he's given a report, and there's all sorts of people coming to harass him, Jews, that didn't like him at one iota. And they raised such a big ruckus about Paul. They've confronted him within the temple. They're actually got him, and they are beating the tar out of him. And the Roman garrison comes and saves Paul's life. And they pull him out and say, what's going on? And these Judaizers, they're called, these Jews, are making all sorts of false accusations against Paul and saying he needs to be put to death. And the poor centurion that's in charge of it says, I can't let you guys have this guy. This isn't right. So he they physically have to pick up Paul and carry him away from this group that's trying to harass him. Well, he arranges for there to be a little chance for him to meet the Sanhedrin and Paul to hash out their differences. And it goes south again. So he says, well, I'm going to take you up to Caesarea Philippi and have you talk with the governor up there, because turns out there's going to be an ambush planned against Paul if there's another meeting with the Sanhedrin. 40 dudes had taken a vow that they would kill Paul, and they weren't going to eat or drink until they did it, and so they wanted the Sanhedrin to talk the centurion into bringing Paul back in again, and they would kill him. And so Paul's nephew learns about this, warns Paul, warns the centurion, and so he says, I'm going to send 200 soldiers and a bunch of cavalry, and we're going to get him out of here, get him someplace safe, because he also happened to find out that Paul wasn't just a Jew, he was a Roman citizen. And so he had rights. They get him up there. He has to sit in jail, messing with a couple of kings for 2 years while they're trying to figure out what to do with him. And finally, he had just, because of false accusations and stuff like this, he says, I appeal to Caesar. And I believe it's Agrippa, or is it Festus? I forget. Festus, I think it is. Says, you appeal to Caesar you can go. And so they get him on a ship, him and his centurions, and they take off across the Mediterranean Sea on this wonderful missionary trip to Rome. And as you remember, the weather didn't exactly cooperate with them. And they end up coming into a little place after 2 weeks of a horrendous northeasterner where they all think they're going to die, and they have to shipwreck the ship to save themselves. Over 200 people on the ship, over 270 people on the ship. And so they end up on this little island called Malta. And this is where we're picking up. Did it work? All right. So Brandon and Rachel and your dad, Dan, I've been working on a new program that they can modify on the fly here, so I was giving them a little test. Didn't tell them where I'm coming from. So we're here in Acts chapter 28. They've landed on the land. They've all got there safely by the grace of God. Okay? Once safely on shore, we found that the island was called Malta. The islanders showed us unusual kindness. They built a fire and welcomed us all because it was raining and cold. Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he put it on the fire, a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself on his hand. When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer, for though he escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live." But Paul shook the snake off into the fire and suffered no ill effects. The people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall dead, but after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds. And they said, He was a god. I'm glad we didn't have snakes on our honeymoon, dear. These are a bunch of Gentiles, a bunch of non-Jews, probably from Phoenicia heritage and stuff like that have come out. They've come to welcome the shipwrecked people of over 270 people, and they're building a fire for them because it's cold, rainy and cold. Of course, we read about Paul. He's not the kind of guy that's just going to sit there and let other people serve him. He's the kind of person that gets in there and does the work, doesn't he? So as he picks up this bundle of wood, apparently there's a snake in there. Now, what do snakes do when they're cold? Well, they kind of get lethargic, stiff, look like a piece of wood, right? Easy for him to miss something like that, especially if it was dark. As he's putting that wood into the fire, that snake warms up and nails him right on the hand. Now, this isn't just a little bite, is it, where he just nails him and backs off. It says this guy's hanging on to his arm for everybody to see. Now, viper, that's your rattlesnakes. That's your water moccasins. That's your coppermouth, or copperheads, and stuff like that. All right? What do we know about them? Very poisonous. Very poisonous. If he's hanging on, you know he's got fangs. So he latched on and was holding on good. So Paul should have got a whopping dose of venom, right? So just like them, what would you expect? This dude's dead meat, right? At least his arm's going to swell up, and probably he's going to die from this. And what do the people say about this particular event? All right. This man must be a murderer, for though he escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live. Justice. Did you notice how it's written? It's not with a little j. It's with a capital J. All right. So when we go into the courts of our land, you see this lady, right? These statues or these pictures of this lady with a blindfold, and she's holding out a scale in front of her. You ever seen that? Lady Justice. Based off of a Greek goddess. Virgin daughter of Zeus, who was in charge of equality and fairness. So we've got two religions meeting right now. We've got these people that are thinking the Greek gods and what's going to be just, and then you've got Paul that's bringing the true God and representing him. So they're thinking, okay, Lady Justice has determined that Paul, you are guilty, probably of murder, something deserving death. And somehow or the other, you escaped it by getting out of that shipwreck alive. So justice is still going to be served. I'm going to throw a snake on you. But Paul didn't suffer any ill effects. Why? Well, he wasn't a murderer, right? Yes, he was. He'd been forgiven. Not in the way they're thinking, though. Remember when Jesus sent out the disciples, I think it's in Luke 10? And he sent them out to start spreading the word that he's in the area, that the gospel's here, that salvation is coming down the road. And he says something to those people. He says, you're going to be able to trample snakes and scorpions. He gave them divine protection from those particular beasts. So when Paul ends up in this situation, he's an apostle of God. He's got the same divine protection. Even though Satan tried to kill him in that shipwreck, even though Satan's trying to kill him again with this snake bite, God says, I got a plan for you. Because if you go back to the shipwreck, just the night before it's going to happen, Paul says he had a vision where an angel of the God stood before him and said, you are going to stand trial in front of Caesar. Paul knew, at least for the time being, he was going to live to at least reach that point. He had God's protection. But it served as an example to those people that maybe they were thinking about God's the wrong way. He was an example to those people of God's grace. He was an example to those people of God's mercy, of God's protection. And how did they start thinking about him? Well, he's got to be a God too. You reckon Paul kind of squished that one? Yeah, he did. Doesn't say so directly there, but he certainly did. But it had an effect on those people. Verse 7. Didn't tell you about that one, did I? There was a state nearby that belonged to Publius, chief official of the island. He welcomed us to his home, and for 3 days he entertained us hospitably. His father was sick in bed, suffering from fever and dysentery. Paul went to see him, and after prayer placed his hand on him and healed him. When this had happened, the rest of the sick of the island came and were cured. They honored us in many ways, and when we were ready to sail, they furnished us with the supplies we needed. Paul used this as an opportunity, didn't he? This wasn't something bad that happened for no reason at all. This is a chance for me to start a church here in Malta. This wasn't on my plan. This wasn't where I expected to be. But you know what? I'm never going to see these people again. Here's my chance. Here's my opportunity. And he makes the most of it. And he has such a positive effect upon these people that when they want to leave later, the island gives them all the supplies they need to make it on to Rome. Well, does that have anything to do with you? Does that affect us any way in our lives? How many of your plans all go perfectly? I don't see any hands up there. So life throws us these curves, doesn't it? It shipwrecks us someplace that we don't want to be. Someplace we did not anticipate. Maybe it tries to hurt us in a way that should cripple us. How are we going to respond? Is this a threat? Is this a bad thing? Or is this an opportunity? Because that's how Paul saw every setback he ever had. It's an opportunity. This is a chance for me to tell somebody else about Jesus, to show people what God's about. He intended to go to Rome as a missionary. Do you think he would have ever got into Caesar's courts that way? Probably not. But because of this legal battle he's going through, he's going to testify in front of Caesar. And although the Bible doesn't give us the exact things that went on there, you can bet he talked to Caesar the same way he talked to Agrippa, the same way he talked to Festus, and introduced them to God. And introduced them to the way that he followed. That's us. Satan may try to screw up your plans. Yes. But God can use it for something good. To reach places, get somewhere that you never anticipated you could have gone before. And so that's my challenge for you today. That's my encouragement for you this morning. Don't look at that shipwreck as something bad, but as a chance to do something different. Don't look at a cold night in a cold cabin as something awful, but as a start of something that's a grand adventure that's lasted for 37 years. Because we have to be adaptable. We have to be ready to change. And we have to trust on God that's giving us the strength and the protection to do it. Allow Him to work. And if we can help you in some way this morning in doing that, we're going to sing a song. There's a chance for you to come down and ask us as a congregation or catch us here after services, and we'll pray with you too. But I invite you to stand and sing and press forward on God's way.
I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided